Not in this place.
Not today.
She refused to charge freezing soldiers. The next afternoon, the army shut down her street. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air as steam clouded the windows of the tiny roadside diner. Outside, sleet fell like needles from the gray sky, spattering against frozen windshields. And inside, behind the scratched counter and the old register, a woman with emerald green eyes and a stare sharp enough to slice through barbed wire leaned forward and said 6 words that would ripple through the entire military base. "I'm not taking their money." Her voice was calm, final. Even as the soldier across from her, still trembling from frostbite, pulled out a wad of cash, wrinkled bills still wet from the snow, she pushed the envelope back across the counter. Behind him, more soldiers stood silently, their faces raw from the storm, their boots soaked, their pride clashing with the desperation in their eyes. None of them knew this woman. But by the next afternoon, the entire base would. The next day, at precisely 1600 hours, something happened no civilian had ever seen before on that street. Military vehicles blocked both ends of the road. Armed MPs stood at either side. A black Humvee idled just feet from the diner's faded sign. And inside, that same woman calmly served coffee, while the base commander himself waited in the corner booth, an untouched envelope of cash on the table between them. What had this diner owner done to trigger a visit from the most powerful man in the district? And why? Wasn't she even remotely afraid? Mara Villalobos never asked for recognition. For the past 14 years, she ran the Green Light Grill, a nondescript, heat-leaking shack just 2 miles from Fort Talcott. Every day, she opened at 0400. Every day, she brewed the same bitter pot of coffee, flipped the same runny eggs, and watched the same convoy of soldiers march past her windows. She didn't have much: a leaky roof, a 1-bedroom flat above the kitchen, and a stubborn streak that scared off more men than it won. But she did have rules. And rule number 1? Never profit off someone else's suffering, especially not soldiers. Especially not kids with chattering teeth and empty stomachs, soaked through after night patrols while the base heaters failed, again. That morning, a dozen soldiers came in, cold, stiff, hungry. The heaters in their barracks had gone out during a surprise storm, and word had spread that the only place with hot food and working heat was her diner. They tried to pay. She refused, and when their officer insisted, waving an envelope of $100 bills from the quartermaster's emergency fund, she snapped, "Not in this place, not today." But the officer didn't leave it there. He made a call. Said she was interfering with morale protocol. Said she compromised chain of command optics. By noon, command knew her name. By nightfall, rumors were flying. Some said she was getting arrested. Others said she'd be banned from selling to military personnel entirely. Mara didn't care. She kept her doors open through the night, letting exhausted soldiers sleep in booths while the coffee brewed nonstop. When the food ran low, she cracked open her private pantry. When a soldier broke down crying in the back hallway, ashamed to admit he had no gloves, she gave him hers. But by morning, the street outside looked different, marked, quiet, too quiet. At exactly 4:05 p.m., the convoy arrived. Mara was rinsing mugs when she saw the Humvee roll up. The men in uniform didn't look angry. They looked serious. The base commander himself, Colonel Aidan Strick, stepped inside. Tall, composed, and wrapped in a coat with 4 rows of ribbons, he walked straight to the booth in the back. He didn't say a word, just placed an envelope on the table and waited. Mara didn't flinch. She dried her hands on her apron and marched over. "If this is payment," she said flatly, "you can keep it." He slid the envelope open. Inside wasn't cash, it was a signed letter, an offer, to become an official civilian partner, authorized to provide emergency support to soldiers, with full protection and recognition, and a line at the bottom, scribbled in his own hand, "Because in a war zone, kindness is a weapon too." But Mara hesitated. Accepting meant paperwork, military involvement, oversight, and worse, It meant becoming a cog in the same system that had sent these young men out into a storm without backup. She stared at the letter, fists clenched. What if they used her name as a PR stunt? What if they twisted her story to look like a patriotic business deal? What if the very system she challenged swallowed her whole? Colonel Strick saw the doubt in her eyes, and he did something unexpected. He stood, removed his gloves, and saluted her. "You reminded my men what honor looks like," he said. "You reminded me." There was no order, no demand, just the truth. Mara looked around the diner. Soldiers lined the booths. One handed dishes back to the sink. Another was sketching the American flag on a napkin. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't about control. It was about presence. About being the one warm place in a frozen system. She reached for a pen. "I'll do it," she whispered, "but only on my terms." A week later, the Greenlight Grill had a new sign in the window. Official Morale Shelter, Fort Talcott Division. But it was still the same place, same scratched floors, same cracked mugs. Only now, soldiers came not just for food, but for a reminder that humanity didn't end at the edge of the base. Mara never changed her prices, never changed her rules. And every afternoon, like clockwork, one of the Humvees would pull up, just to check in, just to say thanks. Because in a world of steel and silence, she'd built a fire that never asked for fuel, and it burned with something stronger than orders. It burned with something the Army had almost forgotten how to name: decency.
If this story touched you, hit that like button and drop a karma in the comments below.